can't see. I'm in a practice session. What does
Darla,
that
can you
mean?
hear? Darla, can you hear me? This
I
is Ruth
can.
Ann.
I can hear you.
I cannot hear anybody in the room. I don't know if they have us muted or what.
They're on mute. From what
Okay,
I see.
I see now. You are correct, Lisa. They have themselves on mute.
They
That's
have
what
themselves on mute. Okay,
okay. I see now. Okay.
Max, can you let them know that they're on mute?
Well, they should be able to hear us. Let's see if we can get,
Lisa Werder
there
Bryan.
they go.
Present?
She responded.
Hey, Stevie, we just got off mute. We haven't heard anything else you said.
Lloyd Cunningham. Dan DeMarco. Pat DeMarco. Tina Doucet. Ariam Ford Graver. Nick Griesok. Mark Heckman.
Here. Yeah.
Rebecca Kiernan. Ken
She sent some,
Lasoda.
hey, Stevie,
Here.
she sent something in and
Here.
said she wasn't going to be there.
Here.
Ruthie Ann Omer.
Here, can you hear us in the boardroom?
She's there.
Will
Hello?
Pickering.
Okay.
No. Yeah, well, if you could just confirm that they're on the screen.
Yeah, I see this.
Yeah, we seem to have a.
I'll finish up reading through and we'll catch them. Kathy Sapp. Danielle Ventresca.
Here.
Okay.
No, if you could just confirm that they're on the screen.
I just sent a chat and asked if they could hear us in the boardroom.
We can now.
Okay, good.
Stevie, I see Ken is on.
Right.
Ken Lasoda is on.
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
I'm here, Ken Lasoda, I'm here. Yes, excellent, thank you.
Keep going. Yeah.
Read them over again.
No, just continue.
We finished.
We're finished? Do we have a quorum?
With 16 members and 5 vacancies, we need 9 members for a quorum. Stevie, do we have 9?
That's what I'm checking here. From what I can see, I see 7.
Okay, we don't have a quorum at this time. I did see a chat, Jean, who's perhaps joining us, asked if we could wait a little bit to see if anybody else signs on. But we do have a couple of information items that we can move to the top of the agenda. The action item that we do have the vote for is the meeting minutes, and then previous meetings, if we've not had a quorum, we've just had a continuance of that motion until the next meeting where we do have a quorum.
All right, we'll skip item number 2, outreach activities provided by Joe. Joe?
Yes, sir. Yeah, put power on.
Can't hear him.
We can't hear anything.
Yeah.
How about now? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, just a real quick recap of what we announced this year. We had a great afternoon, great morning, We had some challenges this year, obviously, because we were in a much smaller footprint, really than we've ever been. All in all, everything worked as well as it could be, and probably even better. Let's just take you through a couple of slides and a couple of photos. This is our yearly family portrait, 8:30 every morning. As soon as that happens, guests start arriving, and they came in on a pretty regular basis all throughout the day, which was good because of the footprint. We were able to manage crowds a little easier. Lots of smiles, lots of kids this year having a good time. The famous plumbers exhibit was back with the very nice rain jackets that were evidently a big hit this year. That a lot of them went home with the kids. And the tunnel boring machine model was very popular this year. There's a lot of interaction between guests in all four of the clean water plant tents. So it's good to see that people are interested in what we're doing. When it was all over with, we had a little over 1,000 visitors, which is big. I think last year we were somewhere in the 700s. So it was a nice increase for us. We had about 600 tour participants. We went through 1,200 box lunches, 65 cases of bottled water, and I saw a lot of smiling faces. So all in all, we had a good day.
Thanks, Joe.
The only other thing I wanted to mention, Tim, here is next week, we're going to be having a community meeting in the Keys office. It's on the 29th of October, 10 a.m. September, excuse me. 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. over at the Crivelli building. So this will be our first kind of big foray into the public with what we're doing in the Keys office.
And the purpose of that is to convey the tunnels and what you're doing.
Introduce the project really
Okay,
to
good.
the residents.
Okay. Everybody who's sitting back, you're more than welcome to come up to the.
I know.
Especially if you're going to be speaking. And you sitting in the back bench. Any questions by the attendees on Zoom?
I have a question. It's Darla. How is the site selected for the McKees Rocks meeting, Joey?
Internally between Arlene and myself.
Was the community involved in the selection? The mayor and the borough?
The borough was invited to participate. We told them way ahead of time what we're doing. They've chosen not to participate.
No. Were they weren't part of the decision about where to hold the meeting?
No, they were not.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you. Next item is the grow update. Tim? Please do. Closer to the mic, the better.
So what I wanted to talk about for the grow update is just give an overview of the performance evaluation that the team goes through when a grow project gets an award. They go through their design, they go through their construction, they do their post-construction monitoring. And then part of that, when they're done with the monitoring, they write their final report and they send that to us. And when we get the information, the final report, we do a performance evaluation. And that performance evaluation, the goal basically is to justify, this investment that we're making with the municipalities. So want to talk about the challenges that we face, with the performance evaluations, the process. Give a quick summary and then just open things up to questions from, the committee.
Okay.
So initially, always the challenges for these performance evaluations comes down to the monitoring. The projects get built, and that's great. But when we award a grow grant, we're basing that off of what we know, but not at, most of the time, it's not what has been put in the ground yet. So we're doing our best to assess it, and we're very conservative with our estimates. But then the actual project gets built, and then the post-construction monitoring. You know, and when you have pre-construction monitoring, that's your base. But post-construction monitoring, you could have differing weather conditions. We had a lot of projects that pre was in, before 2018, then we had a bunch of projects where post-construction monitoring was in 2018, which was the wettest year on record. So being able to gauge how effective a project was based on that is difficult. Groundwater conditions in those situations vary based upon what the winter's like. Also, the duration, the seasonality of the monitoring data, pulling all of this together, it's a challenge. It's not something you can't overcome, but these are the things that we have to look at when we're assessing how good is the data. And for
Have you met any resistance in performance of post monitoring?
not once.
Okay. Is there for lack of a better term of art, is there a stick where you can, if people don't perform post monitoring, is there something in the agreement? Because once
They don't get
the
paid.
project's done, you pretty much have spent all the money, right?
We hold back the 15%, but
Okay.
if they do not do that if they don't do that, that part of the grant, if they do not do that part of the agreement,
Mhm.
they will not be eligible for future agreements. There's language in there, Karen, if I recall correctly, if you are in violation of any of our agreements.
So the
You're-
15% holdback is pretty significant too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the whole point of making it 15 instead of
Yeah.
10 or something, just a good chunk of money to hold back, and then they get their job done.
Okay, thanks.
And not once though has anybody really held back on that.
Mhm.
Well, it worked before, but now it's not. I'll just. So more challenges to source control projects are not.
Pull that speaker down by you, Tim, so I can hear you on.
Welcome.
Thanks. Mary Helen from yellow. I've been the recipient of that. Mhm.
When we do source control projects, we look at it in the sewer shed basis. Sometimes those sewer sheds are fairly large, but the actual projects are very small. I'm pointing to the group, and maybe the folks at home can see the map that shows little green lines on the map. In the grand scheme of things, this project was only less than 2% of the overall area. So being able to post monitor something that relatively is small, it's very difficult to catch the difference that you're going to get between pre-construction and post-construction. We do our best, but sometimes those are challenges to overcome. Meter accuracy in those situations, meters can only detect so much flow. And if we're assuming that we're getting rid of maybe 10,000 gallons of water a day, that could barely meet the error of a monitor. So sometimes those are challenges that we have to take a look at, try to overcome, use our best engineering judgment. Then there are large projects where the monitoring is very noticeable and you can see where those differences are. When we take a look at, we assess the projects based on a typical year. So 12 months of hydraulic modeling went into the assessment that we based our award. When we do the monitoring at the end, we're trying to assess the monitoring to 12 months. And that's sometimes pretty difficult if you only start off with, say, 2 or 3 months. Stretching that, what would a whole year look like based on this limited amount of data? And then once you have that 12 months, then trying to adjust that So it matches up with the typical year, which our models are based on.
Tim, I think Lisa had a question, her hand's raised on the,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Lisa, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the presentation. I have a question about the monitoring, Tim, and my question is that, are you finding that the cost of post-construction monitoring is an inhibitory factor for communities that are financially strapped?
When we started Grow, monitoring was not an eligible cost. And at that time, maybe we could have said maybe that it was, but now in the program, one monitor is an eligible cost.
Okay,
So it should not be any kind of factor in trying to get this. And also, when a municipality may not have the resources, we do have equipment, we do have people, we have done grow monitoring for the municipalities. And we're trying to keep that offer out there. Sometimes we max out on what we can do and we don't have the abilities, but say right now we do.
And you can expense that into the 15% holdback?
Yeah.
Okay. good.
great, thank you.
Hey, Tim, this is Darla. So it's an interesting question, but do we have to be uniform in the way we treat people, regardless of the municipality?
Some municipalities, if they ask for help, we give it to them. Other municipalities elect to do it on their own because they trust their engineers. There were a few cycles where it was mandatory that ALCOSAN did the monitoring, but what ended up happening was that those requests exceeded our capacity to do the monitoring. And so we allowed for the engineers to do it. And then the question was, well, why are we still saying it's an ineligible cost? We're trying to figure out how this is done. So let's make this an eligible cost. We were going to pay for it.
So let me ask the question in a different way. Do we look at low mod communities differently than we look at any other community?
No,
Okay.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we don't look at disadvantage. We don't take that conversation and say, well, we're going to look at this community and it's a disadvantaged community. We wait for that community to ask, or we offer an advance, or now it's an eligible part of the project.
well, it's an eligible part of the project now for everyone if they request the monitoring. Or
Yeah,
if
I
they-
was going to, do the communities know to request the monitoring? I mean, I don't
Yes.
know that everyone knows that cost is, can be captured in that way.
When we have conversations with the municipalities, we've made that clear, and the engineers absolutely know. And, you know, if we have conversations with officials, we try to make that aware, but the engineers absolutely know. And we would hope that the engineers pass that along to their clients.
It's their duty to, so one would assume. I think both Darla and Lisa, especially Darla, I think what you're leading to, I think an extended question would be that are the grants going to communities that are in need? You know, there's a matching portion of the grant, and there's communities out there that simply don't have a matching portion. And so a lot of these grants are following those communities that have money or are disposed to doing the work. There's some communities that are just not doing much of anything. And so I think that's the other challenge to the GROW program is, are we reaching those in need in a different way? And I don't know.
Yeah, in the several cycles, we had a lot of participation from communities that are in need. But that participation was also a function of what the regulatory requirements of that time were.
Mhm.
You know, in 2017, they had their source control studies that needed to be done. So, and they were required to do a project. So they put those projects in for grow fund. Afterwards, some folks are, we try, it's not that we're not trying to reach out to them, but we can't force people to do projects that they may not be able to do. And we've made offers to try to help them find third-party funding. One municipality so far has taken us up on all the offers that we've given out, Homestead being that one municipality.
To your knowledge, has any municipality refused to execute the consent decree?
That would probably be Dave.
Nobody has refused. What is still in the review process?
Okay,
Just one,
Just one.
and that's both combined and separate.
And that's a separate,
Okay,
no, it's combined.
okay.
And there is a separate who has received several extensions due to the potential sell of their system.
thank you. Okay, Tim.
Okay.
I'm sorry, the people who are on, this is Zoom, right? I don't wanna do
Yes.
that. If you're on Zoom and you're not all listed, so if we can't see your hand, just yell out and we'll recognize you and come in. Thank you.
So the process that we go through when we get the final reports, we take a look at the as-bills. As-bills are a requirement. Just to see, okay, what you said you were going to build, is that what you built? For the most part, people are building what they say they're going to build. Then we take a look at the flow monitoring. The flow monitoring assessment, the engineer for the municipality will do it. Recently, and it wasn't always a requirement that we asked for the flow monitoring with the final report, but we've shifted gears. If we don't have the flow monitoring, I make a phone call and just say, I need the flow monitoring that went into this, because we want to see what's going into it. How did you guys come up with your answer? And then also it helps us have develop an archive of the grow post and pre and post construction monitoring. And then we take a look, once we take a look at the data, we make a judgment as to how reliable do we believe the data is. And there's some criteria for a reliability assessment. And that reliability assessment is categorized as highly reliable, medium reliability, or low reliability. And there's various components to it. What's the pre-construction monitoring duration, post-construction monitoring duration? Is it synoptic? Monitored area? A lot of factors go into making this determination. And this determination then goes into the next step, where we take a look at, how does the monitoring then compare to the model that we built and assess this job? Now, low quality flow monitoring data, and maybe it's not because they did not try to do a good job. It just might not have been a very good monitoring location. Maybe monitoring is just not going to work. Those are situations that are real. So we may look at the model and say, we're going to still use the model that we originally had, and this will be our estimate. But if it's medium or if it's high, we're going to take that flow monitoring data and do the best that we can to make a more reliable judgment as to how effective that project was. Once we start to see how reliable the data is, we have like this middle line, and then kind of do a sensitivity analysis to see, okay, on the low end, how much flow did we get out of the system? On the high end, how much flow did we get out of the system? Now, one thing that maybe no one's catching, I'm not talking about overflows, and I'm only talking about how much water we're taking out of the system, because one of the key things in our consent decree is reduction of stormwater volume. Even though the metric of overflow control is the main driver of growth, the monitoring typically does not monitor the overflows. It's monitoring what kind of excessive water is coming in. And that's what we're judging everything. So we'll update the municipal website with every 2 months based upon whatever final reports we get. We do the assessment, log everything. If there's monitoring data that's not, we don't consider reliable, that doesn't go into this report. Only highly reliable data and medium quality data we're using to inform this. So far, we have 40 projects that have, medium to high data. Of that, the estimated flow reduction is 1.66 million gallons. So for those 40 projects, 1 million gallons a day. It may not sound like a whole lot and literally a drop in the bucket compared to what we treat, but that's a lot of water when you take a look at 365 days a year that we're getting, hundreds of millions of gallons of water out of a year. Every year we do a grow performance annual report. That's an internal report that we do to keep track of everything. And then based upon the most impactful projects that will go in and we'll start informing the models that Mike might use or Kim might use, to see how much flow is going to be coming to the plant in the future. So this is the summary of it. Here's high. So we have 7 projects out of our 70 that are high quality data. Now it's not saying that the only 7 have great data. It's just if it doesn't meet all those criteria, it's not going to be high. And the estimated flow is 273 million gallons a year. Our model, when we assessed it before we awarded the grant, was 152 million gallons. So it's, for the most part, overperforming. Same thing here with medium reliability, also overperforming. And then the low reliability, we won't base anything off of the monitoring data. We just go back to what the model said. So going through this, 89% of the projects are at or above what we estimate. 11% of the projects are underperforming. Typically, the underperforming ones are I&I agreed infrastructure. On the flip side, overperforming ones, sewer separation and I&I also tend to overperform. Those are the ones where we have pretty conservative estimates. With I&I jobs, we assume that 30% of your groundwater is coming out. Well, if it's super leaky and you put a liner in, you might get way more than 30% coming out, which is good for us and it's good for the municipality. And that's it for my presentation. Are there any questions?
Any questions from people on the Zoom? So are there any, have you seen anything noticeable at the plant? Does that equate to the reduction at the plant?
Yeah, so specifically, if you're talking about grow and some of the things right now, I'm not sure that we can cite those aspects of it. What I can cite that certainly over the years, our recovery, the treatment plant's recovery from wet weather events is much, much faster than it once was, meaning there's far less water. We understand when the rain event occurs, the water gets in there, but the prolonged periods of time that we used to be pumping at maximum capacity because of I&I or other sources of water that are no longer coming there allow the treatment plant to recover and get out of that combined sewer overflow condition that much faster.
Okay, so on average, from all staff, is there a substantial return on investment of the grow program in staff opinion? Nobody wants to jump up on that.
Nobody
wants to be on record.
My answer.
I think you have to look at things in terms of, cost effectiveness. how much the project cost in terms of how many gallons was removed at the overflow. And
We can't really hear Mike.
I'm sorry.
Mike, come to the table. Thank you. Let us know.
I think you have to look at it as all projects in terms of, cost effectiveness. Gallons of overflow removed, millions of gallons of overflow removed, versus the cost of the project. So in terms, you could get a very successful I&I project and get water out. But then again, you might have a highly successful capital project, such as a shaft or something to take flow to a tunnel or whatever. So it all varies.
And I think that's what I'm trying to come to is to weigh the difference between capital projects that you're doing here as opposed to green projects that we're doing out there.
Mhm.
And that may not be relevant because we, the municipalities, have to do something. And so having the GROW program helps us to do that, which ultimately comes back to the advisory committee, is that there is an end to the GROW program as it's stated currently. So the issue is whether the advisory committee wishes to support a continuation of the GROW program. And, I don't want to beat the drum here, but it's disappointing that there's two of us here. We're outnumbered by staff by 10-1 here, but which called, and Mary Ellen, I think it's a fair fight. But it's kind of.
That after. Only 4.
But it's, if we're not coming to these meetings and we're not even getting a quorum, it does not speak well to what we're trying to do. But having said that, I think we as a committee need to stake out a position or whether we're going to continue to try to support the GROW program by a recommendation to the board, which is why we're here. We want to structure a recommendation to the ALCOSAN board that we support the continuation of the GROW program. Please.
Tim, I have to tell you, I kind of take offense to your statement that those of us on Zoom are not at a meeting. Everybody has situations in their day, their meetings. We happen to have a fundraiser, Lisa and I. We did not pick this date. We attend every meeting. Just because we can't be in person, and we were in person previously, doesn't mean we're not interested in participating. So I think maybe restating it, I completely agree with you about the quorum and why people aren't either on Zoom or in person. Absolutely, that is terrible. And we need to support all these programs and go forward. But there's many people on the Zoom call that are interested, and they are here. They're just not, in person. And I think that is a thing of the future. So I just hope that everybody understands that we are interested. It's just sometimes life situations do not permit you down there. Lisa and I have to be at a fundraiser for another association, and we cannot physically be at ALCOSAN and then make it to our next meeting. So I apologize for that, but I still think that we are here and participating.
I wasn't intending to embarrass or offend anybody. And I'm preaching to the choir because you are here. But my point is that even with Zoom, we can't get a quorum. Even with Zoom. And that's unfortunate. Yes, we all have other things we have to do. And I understand that. But, we're giving, the organization is giving multiple opportunities. We schedule these meetings a month in advance, and we can't even reach a quorum by Zoom. And I think that that's going to be at our peril eventually, both in terms of the way the board looks at us, but more specifically, if we have, these meetings are being watched by the media, and the media is going to ask the question, why can't you get a quorum, even by Zoom? A very legitimate question.
Tim, perhaps it's that we meet every month. And I think that on the agenda, there's supposed to be a discussion of how we begin to set a strategic priority with the board. So it could be a number of factors. I've heard from people as I was out trying to recruit that folks don't want to drive down to ALCOSAN. They see that, especially if you're coming from the east, they see it as a very far drive. When you're coming from the south, it's a very far drive. And when you leave ALCOSAN at 3:30 or 3 o'clock, you sit in traffic. And so it takes them a lot longer to get home. So while we could forgive that for once every quarter or once every other month, I think it's something to consider because that's one of the things that I heard was, I have to drive all the way out to ALCOSAN. I have to get on the parkway. And when I get done with the meeting, I'm sitting in traffic for an hour. So I think there's some other issues at play about it. And thankfully, we haven't had to make any kind of recommendations except to approve minutes. So, I think, at some point we need to explore why so many people, even if they're not on Zoom, I'm going to pick on Lloyd Cunningham right now. He usually attends regularly. I don't know why he's not here, right? I saw that Rebecca Kiernan actually sent an email saying she wasn't able to attend. So I think that we do get folks that actually respond to say they can't attend for some reason or another. And excused absences seem to be an okay thing to understand. So I think there's a lot more at play. That's my opinion, by the way.
Darla, I would agree with you on every point you just made. I think that there are a lot of considerations. I know that the last two meetings I've attended in person, and it's taken me, you know where I live, and there's no real direct way for me to get home. and I've been sitting in traffic for a minimum of an hour, maybe longer, leaving ALCOSAN, which, if it's once every 3 months, that's not a big deal, but once a month, it is sort of trying.
Again, I'm not speaking to those who are in attendance. Zoom is a perfectly acceptable way to attend the meeting. What I'm saying is we have a group of people who have been appointed to this, and we don't have a quorum. They're not here. And if you can't pass minutes, you have to ask yourself, what the hell are we doing? But having said that, and we can't even vote on it, but I would like to have it on the agenda for the next meeting, whether we want to stake out a position, if we can get a quorum, to support the continuation of the GROW program or accept its termination.
Tim, this is Darla. I'd like to wait to hear what somebody that's going to be in the executive team is going to talk about our strategic priorities and how we move forward with the committee. So maybe we can have more participation. I don't want to take a vote on something. A, we can't because there's not a quorum, but B, until we hear what the agenda item is that's on here that Stevie actually distributed. I'm curious about that.
All right, so that segues us into the next item, which is a recommendation from the executive director matters relating to the interim wet weather plan.
And so I'll speak on behalf of Arletta today. So there was some discussions that were brought to our attention and on advising the board, which is a great segue into this topic. We were thankful to hear that, first of all, because I think that was the intentions of this committee, was to, be able to advise in particular on the interim wet weather plan. So in order for that to occur, there was also discussions on how that would happen. So they discussed about breaking out into sessions for the next meeting, which would be like 4 or 5 sessions, and they would be like mini breakout sessions that you could gather a smaller group, get attention on these matters. One of those, which would be GROW. Another one would be the customer assistant program, the CAP program. Another item would be regionalization of the municipal trunk sewers and facilities, which is impactful for the communities. And another one would be the tunnels and how we would propose some green leave behinds from those projects. So there'll be more to come on this and how we move forward for the advisory committee. But it was brought to our attention, and it was suggested that we break out into these sessions and then bring us back together as a group. And it also will pave the path for 2023. So we know this won't happen overnight, but it'll help gear the advisory of the board of these topics to the board for the 2023 advisory committee term. We will, again, like I said, put more information out there so that it's can be viewed upon, but we'd be looking to bring those sessions to ALCOSAN. And they could be self-appointed. So if any one of these groups that you're interested in, you would self-appoint yourself. If one group didn't get attendees, we would have to spread out, kind of delegate those to spread out to the other groups. I don't know if anybody has any comments about that or thoughts on moving that forward.
So if you could forward, if you have a preference to a committee, if you could forward your interest to,
Yeah, that'd be great.
if you could forward your interest to Stevie, we would appreciate that. Additionally, are there any other committee issues or any other items that you would like to form a committee on? Anybody want to speak to that?
Does it need to be related to the wet weather plan specifically? Because we have a very narrow charge.
Yes, Darla, the answer to that is yes, it would be related to the interim wet weather plan, which is our clean water plan.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, that's pretty broad. The interim wet weather plan covers
Yeah.
quite a broad range of topics.
Sure, yes, it is. And I think that the pillars of that plan, could be isolated into that, the GROW, the advisory committee, regionalization, and our tunnels. So I think those topics are pretty broad, even in nature, to the plan. So this could be, we will put this back out to the committee, and then you could, comment back on, those matters that you feel would be of importance. These ones were just brought up in a discussion and were chosen for that reason.
Any other
So
comments?
the committee is going to get an email that lists those discussions, and then you want us to respond back as to what we might be interested in being on. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any other items that you would like to be put into a committee?
No, but I would like to be able to change committees if I go. I mean, I'd like to be part of all of them at some point. Why can't we? Then these are subcommittees, I'm assuming, right, Michelle?
Well, you could think of it that way, but it's just really to focus, to get the committee to focus on that topic, and then bring it back as a group. And then the purpose would be to be advising the board for topics of interest as it relates to the interim wet weather plan for 2023.
So it's essentially what you're saying is we're going to have a one-time conversation in subcommittees and then figure out what our agenda is for 2023?
That's the point there. Yes, Darla, is to do that. So you would have, your subcommittees that would come back to the table with their recommendations on how to move forward with advising the board on those topics.
Anything
if
else?
I heard you correctly.
I had wanted to discuss the finance also. And finance would run into both. I think we as an advisory group are getting pressure to look at rates. So we have to substantiate rates. That's from the perspective of our colleagues. That's why the hell we're here. The rest of it is what's going to happen is going to be driven primarily by the engineering requirements of ALCOSAN to push forward our compliance. So I would like to add finance to that. And the discussion around finance is going to be, how are you determining rates? Where's your bond placement? I just read in the paper the other day that the federal government, in its wisdom, gave $474 million to Tijuana, Mexico, to repair a sanitary sewer plant so that the water in San Diego Bay clears up. That's fine. I understand it. So, but the question is, if the government can give $474 million to the Mexican government, I'm thinking they could probably drop $100 million on us without too much trouble. And so those are the issues that I think we want to follow too.
I think as they move forward in these groups too, that of course the cost of each of these items too is part of that rate structure,
Sure.
right? So that's part of each one of these groups.
I mean, there's nothing in these groups that we're gonna say we don't want to do.
Right.
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 This is
But
all
of
stuff
course,
we
the
do.
rates are impactful for all
Sure.
those items.
I mean, if we agreed that we want more grow, we have to understand that's going to impact our rates.
Yep.
And so, that's a decision that everybody on the advisory committee doesn't have the ability to make those decisions for their communities, right? I mean, we're advising based on what we know from ALCOSAN and how we understand, because we're legitimately subject matter experts that we believe, because the grow projects are basically customer assistance projects for municipalities. I mean, I don't want to say it like that, but it is. It's a CAP program for municipalities. And so we all pay for it. The ratepayers pay, right? So everything that we're going to talk about, Tim, in my opinion, is going to have to do with impacting the cost of the wet weather plan. And that's going to impact rates.
Sure. And back to your earlier comments, is that an equitable plan? Is that being divided across, equitably across everybody? I mean, one of the discussions that Mary Ellen and I had on the way down here was that her residents are not only paying for a consent decree, they're paying for their compliance. So they're paying double. And so are the downstream communities being equitably treated in that program?
We were talking about my consent decree, and I'm not alone. My gold line standard, I'm not gonna meet it. Get to 85%. And I think one of my overflows is like 10% or something. But so I'm gonna be paying for the next 5 years on this order, and then the next order. And in the meantime, when the tunnel and the work here at the plant, which is far more substantial than anything I could do in my community, that'll affect my overflows more than anything I'm gonna do. But yet I still have to do it. So,
Right.
So my residents are gonna pay now with these projects. And then when the tunnel comes in and the rates have to go up, which we all have to pay for that, they're gonna pay again.
Mm-hmm.
For what could have been answered in the tunnel. Or to some extent, may not take all my troubles away, and I'm one person. That's what Tim and I were talking about, and I don't know how we solve that. I don't, unless regionalization is getting us closer to solving those kinds of problems, to some extent.
Cut off taps. Tap ban, Mary Ellen, tap ban.
Yeah, I mean, upstream of me right now, I got sitting on my desk is planning modules for 3 huge developments upstream of me. And I'm looking at the planning module, and they're gonna get them. And I'm going to have more going into that same pipe that I have to get 85%. It's inequitable, it's crazy, it's jacked up. I'm gonna use terminology that all of us can relate to. The last one was for Tim. It's just, so it makes everything we do here difficult, everything that ALCOSAN has to do, very difficult. The regionalization kind of stuff, let's all be blunt, we were forced into. Neither side really wanted it in the beginning. I sat on that committee, it wasn't pretty. But it's getting us closer to where we have to be. But, I don't know how you ever make it equitable. Like, I understand all my stuff because every penny that we take in is thought about on how we spend it, every penny. I'm telling you that, and we invest where we can. But there are communities out there that don't have the capacity, even on their staff or their engineering firms or et cetera, to do that themselves. And if I'm where I am, I can only imagine where some other places are, and they don't even know that they're there, which is really frightening.
So is there any objection to the executive director's request to break into 4 committees?
Well, I will just say one thing on that too. I looked at I was trying to scramble writing them all down. And I will ditto Darla. It would be hard for me to pick one of them. Like, it would be really hard for me to pick one of them.
Right, so if the committee doesn't mind, so I probably would ask the committee to consider, instead of picking one, rank which ones
That's
you
a
would
good
choose
idea.
to participate in. I don't think this is a one-time conversation. It can't be, because just like Darla, if there was 5 committees, she would want to be on 5.
Right.
And I think as much as the committee would be forced to choose one, I think perhaps ranking your choice and then deciding whether or not it's a monthly until you've gone through your first 2 or 3 choices. I think that's perhaps a different alternative, and I think would make it clear with what we send out to the committee to rank your top 3 or top 4, something like that, to at least get out of the option of being forced to just pick one.
Great.
Okay.
Good
That's a great
suggestion.
idea. Thank you.
Or in the alternative, is the advisory committee want to do a committee of the whole on all 4 issues, 5 issues? So what we'll do is, Steve, if you'd be so kind as to send all the members a list of committees and then respond your interest level on each committee, and then we'll decide if we need to do a committee of the whole or separate committees out. Any objection to that?
No.
Hearing that,
You can even have one day, 3 hours and 1.5 hours for this discussion, and
Yeah.
1.5 so you can move to the other
Mhm.
2 on one day or something like that.
All right, so we'll send out a survey to all of you to consider.
I think I want to go back to what Doug said, which is, and I've been thinking a lot about this. I think splitting the advisory group into 4 conversations a couple of times so we get to talk about all of it might be more worthwhile. It's so much easier to talk in a smaller group than it is in a larger group. And that way we could have, I'm looking at the table right there. It could be Mary Ellen, Ruth Ann, Mark, and Danielle could be one group. And then we can either move around, or the next time we meet, people go into different subject areas. It will give more people an opportunity to have a conversation, and also have ALCOSAN help us think about as we're talking about these issues, help us really break down like what we need to know. We might be asking questions about things that we can't solve. Like we can't talk about certain things. We're not going to talk about certain things. And so I think breaking up into smaller groups is a lot more manageable than having a large group. And I also believe we need to do it in person. We can't do it on Zoom. And that's going to be a challenge for everybody at the table, but I think we need to do it in person.
Okay, any other
Darla,
comments?
Darla, I agree about the in person, and instead of being like speed dating, it's like speed committee. Like you spend so much time with the committee, then you move on to the next and you keep going around so you have time to do interjection. But I also agree in person is probably better. So we'll all have to make an effort.
Okay, any other comments?
Just wanted to comment, that would be for the October 18th meeting, and that would be it'd be like an executive session, so it wouldn't be public.
Very good. Everybody okay with that?
Well, I think in terms of the breakup, yeah, we are subject to the Sunshine Act. We are a committee. We are subject under the Sunshine Act and by the bylaws. I think referring to these other groups as subcommittees or even a committee of the whole, isn't really the intent. I mean, these sound like working groups that will get together, will never have a quorum of the advisory committee, therefore is not a committee of the committee or otherwise. So I think if we use the nomenclature and the understanding that these are working groups, then it's not necessarily something that happens in a public meeting, needs to be advertised. It wouldn't necessarily meet a definition for executive session, because really it's just information gathering, but it's also, with less than a quorum of our committee at any one time, for these working groups, we'll call them.
And maybe.
Yeah, I have a,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I don't know if my name shows up, but this is Tina Ducey. I have a question. So on the 18th of October, how many of those working groups will convene?
We're going to try to do 4, so and based on the conversation, we may do a rolling committee. So we can separate into 2 and then get together for 2 or whatever we have to do. That'll come back as a result of, Tina, as a result of the survey that we do in the next week or 2.
Okay,
trying to take
so
some-
another, just another suggestion. Location, the parkway, all those issues are germane to everything I have to deal with. Why not, and I didn't know that they would all occur on the same day, but why not look at either 1 or 2 different, do one in the east and another, at the main facility. But we don't have to be tethered to that facility, especially if you want to ensure that folks are present. So, and just a suggestion.
Well, maybe not have them the same day as this meeting. And bring all these people from ALCOSAN too. Why can't the advisory board just have little mini workshops with a couple people that are needed from ALCOSAN? Separately, maybe based on what people send in for their choices, have, mini meetings in a different location. That like we're talking about, they're workshops, they're not committee meetings. This is like a workshop committee to report back to the next formal meeting.
I agree. That's what I'm saying, not to all be at the ALCOSAN location. Let's shift it. Let some of the staff and the whomever travel and that.
Okay, so on the survey that we do, anyone who wants to offer their municipality building for a meeting, then let's go ahead and put that in there. That's okay. And then if you're fighting the traffic, and we fight the traffic on 28, if you want to change the time of this thing, it can be done in the morning so that you're not fighting traffic at 2 in the afternoon, at 4 in the afternoon instead of 2 in the afternoon. So as part of the survey, we're going to ask, can you volunteer your building and would you be willing to meet earlier in the day? Any other comments or questions? While we have just acquired a quorum, can we take action on the minutes?
Unfortunately, I think we just lost our quorum. Looks like Lisa signed off. By my
Okay.
count, we had 8 even
All right,
before that.
We'll carry it to the next meeting then. Dave, anything from yours?
Just briefly, Mr. Chairman, I think, listening to your conversation, that with the municipal order being issued, I think the municipalities are really waking up, let's use that term, that they understand the necessity. The regionalization part of transferring the trunk lines is really taking off. It is really a factor that has moved exponentially. And the communities are seeing a benefit. They get part of that off their table. But just remember, the SSOs that are associated with those and everything else don't go away. It's just shifting the burden from municipality to ALCOSAN. So when you talk about funding, you're just shifting the funding to another location. And Mary Ellen, what you had said about the interwet weather plan and what's downstream is, I've heard the municipalities at every meeting say that, ALCOSAN is spending all this money, we're doing it. Why should we spend twice? We have opened a conversation with DEP on that matter to say, does it really make sense to spend money in an area that ALCOSAN is going to spend money on? That is not something that's going to happen overnight, but we've started that dialogue. ALCOSAN, we keep them in the conversation. And I think it's a good dialogue to have because it'll allow municipalities to shift the money to areas that ALCOSAN hasn't committed money, and it'll just start helping the system as we go up through it. So I think there's some progress there. And as I've said, when we get the municipal orders, it always sounded good that on a piece of paper, this is what's going to happen. Well, as we start working through them, we have to start making adjustments. I will tell you, the due diligence period for the separate source system is almost up. People got extensions so they could work together with communities. I had a conversation this morning with the health department, and it was pleasing to hear that about 70% of the reports are asking for changes on the Exhibit B, where they've done work that have moved their gold line standard. They have moved an SSO maybe to eliminate that. So the concept of nobody's doing any work, I think part of the problem is we've never categorized all this, cataloged it, I'm sorry, as to what has been going on in the system. So I know when we talked about, we've issued models out to 45 communities so they can start through their process. And one of the things that I learned through the process is ALCOSAN's never received a lot of that modeling change from municipalities. So they've never been able to put it in to the overall model. And working with ALCOSAN, when we released the models, the documents that we had the community sign were to require the municipalities to send back any of their modeling change so that we can get that to ALCOSAN so that the overall model becomes better and better and better, so that it helps them with their regulatory. So, this working together is really starting to be understandable. So, so that's kind of where the overall. So it really was interesting to hear that 70% will change, and we're going to try to categorize that to see what has changed, what has moved on. And but it's really going, and we have 16 multi-municipal points of connection meetings going on right now, where we're getting the communities to start talking. And so I think we're making some progress there. We're averaging about 50 some people at a meeting on the 3WG, so that the engineers are starting to take concern. Next month, we're going to go out to the elected officials to have evening meetings and kind of try to bring them up to speed of where everybody's at. But I think there is a part where we are having conversations with DEP and bringing in the ALCOSAN interim wet weather plan to say, does this make sense to look at that? And the order does talk about it a little bit. So
we were part of our negotiations. We said that from day one when we met with DEP in January, that and they were very clear that we could use that in our due diligence.
yeah, and when you look at a high level, a lot of it does is just said, if a municipality has 7 points of connection that they try to have to move towards 85%, they don't have to maybe worry about 1 or 2. So they can shift other areas, which helps the whole system. But one of the things that I think a municipality has to keep in mind is, if ALCOSAN's says in the interim wet weather plan that a POC gets to a certain number, let's just say it gets above 85% for conversation purposes. If their post monitoring doesn't get it to 85, doesn't mean the municipality got off the hook. Plus, if it moves a barometer of the percent capture in a combined sort, it doesn't say you don't have to do anything there. It just starts getting you closer to that end goal of 85%. So there is movement, and we are listening to the municipalities and have a lot of conversation with ALCOSAN to try to make sure we're coordinating everything.
You sure when sewer taps being regional, the fees?
Hey, Dave, thanks. Any updates from the municipalities? Hearing none, is there any public comment?
He's going to leave you at ALCOSAN, Mary Ellen. Although I'm a big fan of that idea of a tap restriction given the requirements, but hey.
If you do a tap restriction, you are going to isolate the economy of Allegheny County.
Oh, Tim, come
I'm
on.
putting in 20 some new houses. I bought 40 houses and had them demolished. So
Are
you've got to
Are you paying Mary Ellen money? Is it flowing into her system at all?
No, I'm cutting flow. I've overall cut flow. And she gets the benefit of that reduction.
Look at her. I want to see her
You've
face.
got-
Mary
you've
Ellen,
got
what
the-
face are you making?
You've got to
Okay,
build,
thank you.
you've got to build the economy. You still have to build the economy.
Oh, I
You know,
agree, but
And that's what tunnels
I'm
are for.
overflowing down here, few more houses going in, 10,000 a house.
Which is why we're paying for new tunnels.
I know, but
So there's no public comment
I am gonna be left.
and anything else, Max, you need to go to the order.
No, nothing else. And because we never officially started, we don't need a motion to adjourn or otherwise. You can just
Very
end the
good.
meeting.
Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks.